Welcome to part um, 3 of week 2. And this is actually one of my most favorite parts, talking about the differences between a problem-solving court and a traditional court and the differences in roles and functions. So no matter where you are, whether it's an attorney or a prosecutor or a forensic psychologist or somebody coming in from law enforcement, it's really, I think, incumbent upon us to understand that this is a very, very different paradigm in the law, so that when you come into the court, you know what to expect and you know what the judge may be looking for. And because when we first started, I think everybody was a little taken back that I was really looking for problem solving and advocacy, and really wanted to hear from people in a very helpful way, which does not happen in a traditional court the same way. So let's talk about that. First of all, to create a problem-solving model, we want to know, first of all, who are the stakeholders? Who are the individuals and organizations and entities, whether they're public or they're private, across both if it's criminal justice or juvenile justice, criminal justice and mental health and behavioral health and substance use and housing and homelessness, whatever it is that you are really focusing on, and who are the parties and the stakeholders in the community. Those are the people that you are going to need at the table or in the room if you're going to be doing forums and really starting to bring everybody together. So let's look at the criminal justice system just for a moment. This may not be an exclusive, a totally comprehensive list, but of course these are basically your main entities and figures. So of course you're going to want law enforcement, whether that's going to be municipal police agencies or sheriff's offices or whoever represents law enforcement in your community. I'm using the word prosecutors for your state attorneys, district attorneys, but of course that is the prosecutorial arm, if you will, the criminal justice system or juvenile justice system. And if you don't have your prosecutors on board, you are not going to be able to be very successful in developing or moving your problem-solving justice initiative or court or whatever it's going to be forward. So really key stakeholders. Obviously, your public defender's office in a criminal justice system, your jail corrections individuals, particularly those that are going to be, if we're doing mental health and behavioral health, you want those individuals that are running your behavioral health units, maybe individuals that are over transportation, and those that basically oversee the centralized, coordination of transportation and all of that. And in Broward County, ours is called confinement status, but these are really the central hub. Everything goes to the confinement status division in our jail system. You want community advocates that are sympathetic to whatever initiative you are starting. So in a mental health court, of course, that's going to be our members of our National Alliance for Mental Illness, National Alliance for Mental Illness, whatever other mental health associations that you've got, mental health consumer groups, peer consumer groups, any community organization advocates that play an important role in your community. Of course, non-for-profits, both not-for-profits in the public sector, and then of course you've got private entities as well, if they're mental health centers or juvenile centers in the juvenile sphere, the organizations that play a really big role in the populations that you are looking to serve. So community organizations, United Ways, Boys and Girls Clubs, you name it. You really want to start to do an inventory of who needs to be in the room when you are working on developing your initiatives from a problem-solving justice vantage point. Intergovernmental officials, of course, whether it's going to be on a local level, council people, mayors, if it's a state level, county commissioners or legislators on a state level. But there's lots of, I know when we started, our intergovernmental relations people at our county level were very, very important. How about your family members, of course, and consumers of the populations that you're going to be serving, as well as faith-based organizations, leaders in the field generally, and you always want to try to identify media, writers, health writers, community writers, just really, if you can get journalists involved, it's very, very important. More so when we're talking about on the mental health side, your major mental health community centers, hospitals, receiving units. For those dealing with the opioid crisis, of course, then we're going to be dealing with those on that side of the behavioral health system. And so it's very, very important, particularly now because we are all so challenged with regards to responding to the opioid crisis in all of our communities. So issues of school administrators, county human service administrators, social service directors. You really want to get people that are on an authoritative level, as well as non-traditional stakeholders, those in the business community, again, those in faith-based communities, and media on the mental health side or the substance side. So both of these systems, as we look at it, of course, were once totally siloed, separate from each other. One hand wouldn't know what the other is doing, and now you can see so many years upstream, we really are completely integrated and working together in the court system, which is really, really exciting. For the idea of how to begin a problem-solving court or a problem-solving justice initiative as a case study in Broward County, we formed a task force. Some areas will call it, a high-powered coalition. But again, you want individuals that have authority, that are leading in all of these agencies, or delegates of leaders, but they really do have authority. And we really want people who are not naysayers. That's a very important thing. You really want people that are on board with your leadership. And in this particular case in Broward County, we had a circuit judge leading. It's always great if you could have a judge that really wants to lead a task force or a coalition, because when a judge orders you or asks you to come, rather, not orders you, but asks you to come, people do show up. I did not lead my local task force, but we did have a circuit judge that did, and people really did show up. And in our case, our task force met literally for almost 2 to 3 years. They never did give up. They built some really great relationships. And then when the concept of a specialized court was floated, we really did have some terrific shared vision among our stakeholders. So that shared commitment is really what you want, and you really want to allow your community collaborative the time and the space and the opportunity, not, just don't to develop consensus. I think that's really, really important in terms of all these different aspects of what you're looking to accomplish. The other, I think, element that is so important in developing a problem-solving court or a problem-solving initiative is that we understand that we are literally cross-training now. You're bringing different groups together. There's going to be different jargon, different language, and it's really hard sometimes for groups to get off the ground. So we have to know up front that we want to try to use universal language. We have to be very patient in terms of jargon and to try to get individuals that really are of like mind, and again, that have that commitment to do something, to create something new. In 1997, finally, the task force in Broward County agrees to establish a specialized mental health court to effect change in our local criminal justice system for the population that we were looking at. We were looking at, of course, people with mental illness on low-level crimes with misdemeanors. We really wanted to get to the root of the problems that we were trying to solve, the root cause. What was the root cause of the problem that we were trying to solve? And that was a lack of access to care. A lack of access to care. Why? Because we know that the barriers to care are not only stigma and discrimination, but highly fragmented systems of care and systems that are highly underfunded. And so the target was of the court to really take a stand against the criminalization of people with mental illness by developing a diversionary court. And again, as we talked about in week 2 slides, that the court acts as a structural connector in our system between two historically disconnected and independent systems of care, that being mental health, the other being criminal justice, or for those that are working with youth and juveniles in the juvenile justice system. So some basic rules of system reform: start small. Don't wait for the perfect place or time to start, just start. If you wait for some kind of perfect conditions, you may never begin. In mental health court, I didn't know, for example, if the court would really even work. Would it be effective in our goals? I thought about the court initially as a court, at the very least, as a court of conscience. I wasn't sure that the design features and the processes and the operations I put in place would really work, but of course, thankfully they did. And we're asking a lot of our stakeholders, we're asking a lot of our partners to align. Every single one of our partners across an entire huge county like Broward County, almost 2.2 million people had to realign their system models, their service models to share resources with our court. So we are asking a lot to do in our partnerships. So it does take a lot of faith. Keep data. Of course, get your media involved so they could write not only about the initiation and the work and the goals of the court, but they can follow the progress of the court and have really good relationships. And God forbid, if something goes wrong, hopefully, the media will be on your side in case of some kind of a crisis. Obviously, celebrate, every win you can with your stakeholders and lead like you're leading troops, if you will, through communication and relationship building as you go, because that's very, very important to sustain. We talked about leadership a lot throughout the course, just because some of you really are going to want to lead change in your organizations or in your communities or in your systems of care in your workplaces. So you lead by example. That is that you really want to make sure that you're very clear in your mission and that you have the skill sets necessary to do a really good job, I think, of being able to communicate your vision with clarity, to continue to communicate your message of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, much like you're on a campaign, so that everybody's clear on the goals of your initiative, the problems that you're looking to solve, and the strategies that you are going to be using to do it, and act big, act bold, even if it's small, and certainly act with intention and purpose. In the mental health court, as we launched, actually we gained momentum very, very quickly. The federal government took notice very quickly, largely because I think I mentioned earlier, I might have not in the slides, but the first drug court was launched by former U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno when she was the state attorney or the prosecutor for Miami-Dade. She was elevated to the role of first woman U.S. Attorney General under the Clinton administration. So when the mental health court started and she was the Attorney General, she knew exactly what Broward County was looking to do, and she immediately dispatched officials from the Department of Justice to come in and study and analyze what Broward is doing. I'm holding up this monograph called Emerging Judicial Strategies for the Mentally Ill from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which actually describes the four first mental health courts online, and Broward County is listed in that, and I'll note that for you. But literally, you can go to that monograph and actually see the flow, the case flow of each mental health court if you're interested. But it was really exciting to have the Department of Justice come in. We were identified as a best emerging practice for the Department of Justice, and then Congress used the Broward County model as well as the Kings County model in Seattle to pass legislation in 2000, which piloted mental health courts in the United States. And again, to remember that there is not a one-size-fits-all mental health court. It really depends on your community and your jurisdiction in terms of how they want to design their features, but they do share common characteristics. We know they are post-booking models, they are treatment-oriented, they are voluntary, we know that. And here are some other key differences between traditional courts now and problem-solving courts. Traditional courts, let's think about how courts of general jurisdiction operate. First of all, they're adjudicatory, meaning that they don't look to problem solve, but they look to adjudicate cases, correct? That they have a standardized case flow, meaning everybody is treated based on the rules of law, based on due process, based on evidentiary rules, but every case is essentially goes through a standardized case flow. It's an adversarial system, meaning in a criminal case, you have your prosecutor versus your defense. And what role does the judge play? The judge plays as a neutral arbiter. We don't take sides. We can't take sides, obviously. We are there to be neutral. These traditional court process, pretty formal, right? Defendants don't typically talk. It's the attorneys that talk. And again, everything is very highly structured by due process and rule-based. Lawyers, again, are the ones that give voice in traditional courts, and it is what we call a unidisciplinary approach, meaning just the rule of law. Everything is based on rule of law. And of course, in traditional courts, we need very strong legal competencies. In problem-solving courts, extremely different. Problem-solving courts are not adjudicatory, but they are intended to be restorative and rehabilitative. In problem-solving courts, we don't have necessarily a standardized, uniform type of a case flow, but instead it's extremely individually based. We're going person by person by person, correct, to identify what the needs of the individual is so that we can solve problems, correct? In a problem-solving court, the judge is literally a coach, a cheerleader, if you will. We take great pride in not only being extremely caring and compassionate, vulnerable, emotional at times in a problem-solving court that is applying therapeutic jurisprudence versus a judge in a traditional court. You can see a vision of a traditional judge, pretty stoic, sometimes mechanical, sometimes robotic, really depending on the judge, but certainly we are not coaching in a traditional court, but we are coaching and cheerleading and clapping at times when it's appropriate for individuals that are really doing super well in terms of their progress. In problem-solving courts, we're very informal. We are not formal. I don't ask people to rise when I come into the courtroom. It's very informal. Why? Because we're dealing with vulnerable people. I'm really trying to humanize the law through a therapeutic approach, a TJ approach, and I really want to make it very person-focused or person-centered. So my speech is different, my tone is different. I really am emphasizing dignity. Dignity in the mental health court is a #1 priority, and respect, so we can mitigate stigma, so we can mitigate shame. There's a lot of marginalization and shame involving the populations that we serve, whether they're homeless, with mental illness, intellectual disabilities. So it's extremely informal, very empathic, very compassionate in a problem-solving court. We really, truly want people to know that we are here for them, that we are serving them, that this court is for them. It was a house that was built for them, essentially, as opposed to a traditional court where judges are detached, very process-driven. This is really extremely empathic. Why? Because we really want to build trust. We want to level the playing field. We want people to feel that they have voice. In therapeutic jurisprudence, voice is extremely important, to give voice to the individual that is in front of you. That if we could give voice and that person could have a perception that they're treated fairly, then that person, no matter what the outcome is under a therapeutic jurisprudent model or approach, is more likely to feel better about the court experience and more likely to feel that even if they didn't prevail in something that they wanted, more likely to comply with a court order. So I think that storytelling, and having these informal conversations, dialogues in court, and braiding in um, data is extremely important. And of course, problem-solving courts are multidisciplinary. We know that we're bringing in law, health, psychology, mental health, etc., and all of the science that comes along with that. We talked about being compassionate, and I have a case study here, but I think I'm going to pass on that because I'm running a little bit long, just to make sure we go into some other roles. The prosecutor, also a different paradigm. They have to really be able to have concurrent roles. On the one hand, they're in a therapeutic court. They want to promote therapeutic jurisprudence, but they also have the responsibility of protecting the public safety. And so they have to protect victims' rights, make sure that public safety is elevated while they're also trying to be therapeutic. It is a very, very tough line to walk for prosecutors. They have to ensure compliance, deal with sanctions if there's non-compliance, and really balance from a therapeutic vantage point. Remember that problem-solving courts still, we must be accountable. We have to balance all of these considerations and keep data to the best of our ability in our own court systems, and become as expert as we can across a whole host of different disciplines and the evidence base from the social sciences, and never forget to keep learning. We talked about, as we conclude, some of these other considerations, that dignity has got to be elevated, that the values of the court must be very, very well defined. We want to be trauma informed, and and when we started the mental health court, we presumed trauma. We presumed marginalization. So we really wanted to elevate, therefore, that dignity piece. That's how we humanize the law. That's how we get the best outcomes in the court. We want to be culturally sensitive and competent with all of the different people and families that we are working with, in terms of minorities or from all kinds of different countries. In Florida, obviously, we've got people coming in from all parts of the world, like in many other jurisdictions. We want to bring families in, involve them, get them engaged as advocates, and lastly, never lose sight of our vision, and to know that every journey is individual.